Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be wrapping up my March reads. I have some overlap, some crossover into April in this video. I just like to stay current with what I've been reading lately, and that's the best way that I know how. If you're new around here, my name is Beth. I'm a reader and graphic designer based in Cleveland, Ohio. I have 14 books to talk about with you today, and I've done my best to rank those from my least favorite to my most favorite. My least enjoyable read last month was unfortunately The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods. So let's start positive. I really liked the magical realism aspects of this book. It kind of felt to me a little bit like Joanne Harris and her chocolate series. Just an example, there was a tree growing out of the inside of this house, and one of the branches formed a bookshelf on which books magically appeared waiting to be read. There's also a stained glass window that changed its image based on who was occupying the house at the time. And the whole bookshop itself was something that should be there but wasn't. It only appeared at certain times to certain people. And all of these little touches were in addition to some nice little meta references to other fantasy works like Tolkien or Crawling Through a Secret Passageway in the Attic, Alla the Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis, even an incredibly expensive fountain pen that someone wanted to give as a gift, which I saw as a reference to The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Maybe one of the reasons the book didn't connect with me is that it was trying to do too many things at once. This story is told through three perspectives. We have two that are told in present day that feel almost like a contemporary romance novel, and then one that is from the past that has more of a historical fiction kind of vibe. So you might think that the common thread between those stories would be that lost bookshop, but it actually isn't. There are some toxic male characters, there are some female characters who are striving for independence. At every turn, they're getting pushed down or ignored or downright abused. Given that it was in three, it felt like too much. It felt too contrived. If you like stories like Wayward by Amelia Hart, you might enjoy this one because, again, three different perspectives, different timelines, and a unifying thread. And again, like the strong female protagonists, also some of the toxic masculinity in there, that might be a good fit for you. For me, I didn't love it. I wish I could have because the language was very beautiful at times, and again, those magical elements were really fun. But overall, I just did not like it. I gave it 2 stars. This next book is technically a short story or a novella, if you will, but it was packaged within a bind-up of Stephen King's short stories that were categorized as the After Midnight series. And the story that I read was The Langoliers. In this story, we're following a tired pilot who is catching a flight home, having heard some bad news. And so he is a pilot, but he's also a passenger on this other flight. And while he's sleeping, something happens. And when he wakes up, he is among a handful of passengers who are left. Everyone else in the plane has disappeared. The plane is on autopilot, and he and those other characters have to kind of band together and share their different skills and insights in order to figure out what's going on and what to do next. We've got some very emergent leaders that step up, and then some characters that have pretty evident like mental health issues that will play into how they behave. If you like the TV series Lost, you might enjoy this short story. It is kind of just like that, like it's off the rails. There's strange things that happen. This might be a spoiler, but I love time travel as an element in stories, and I don't often find it in the books that I read. For that reason, I gave it 3 stars. But reading this did still kind of cement for me that I don't love the way that Stephen King writes female characters, and I don't know if I am ever going to be a Stephen King girly. It did make me decide to hang on to my copy of 11/22/63 and still give it a try. I've seen a lot of others who love it, so I still might give that one a chance. But the short story was interesting. It was very unsettling. Next, I have Finlay, Donovan Rolls the Dice by Ellie Cosimano. This is, I believe, book 4 in the series, and going into it, I was wondering, is the formula for this going to actually hold up after this amount of time? Because generally we have kind of a main character falls into a situation and things go bad, but then they also resolve in a way that they really couldn't control. It's just by happenstance, kind of like the bumbling detective sort of thing. In this particular book, we're following Finlay and her best friend Vero. They decide to take a trip to Atlantic City for a girls' weekend, but their hidden motive is to find Vero's kidnapped boyfriend. Not only does Finlay's mom want to join them on their girls' weekend, but also they don't have anyone to watch the kids, so they bring the kids along, and her ex-husband wants to join to watch the kids and make sure they're okay. So we have some kind of weird dynamics going into this because obviously Finlay and Vero need to sneak off to try to find the missing person, and she also has her cop boyfriend who shows up out of the blue. There were definitely some laugh out loud moments for me, but it overall felt like a very cheesy movie, and I think I would give this 2.5 stars. Next, I read this book with a very cute cover. The Kamogawa Food Detectives by Hisashi Kashiwai was a little bit of a letdown. This book is set in Kyoto, Japan, where Kiyoshi and her father Nagare own and operate a little tiny restaurant that's hidden in a quiet little village area with only a tiny sign and a sleepy cat to mark its location. Nagare is a retired police officer turned chef, and he and his daughter run a food detective business. They have a obscure ad in a popular magazine, and every once in a while someone stumbles into their restaurant and asks if they can help them find a missing dish that they have loved when they were a child, or they ate during a significant moment in their life, or they want to have the recipe to prepare the food for someone that they love. So Koichi interviews them and she patiently takes notes, and then her father says that they will get back to them in a matter of weeks, and we skip ahead. They have somehow found the recipe, they have recreated the dish, and they serve it up to this guest. Whatever they're hoping to achieve. Maybe they wanted some resolution of a childhood memory, or want to remember the feeling they had on a first date. That kind of comes to fruition in that meal and the conversation that they have with Koichi and Nagare. I think this book could have been very different if we had actually followed Nagare doing his detective work, because it's mentioned that he travels to the hometowns where these people came from, and he goes to the market searching for just the right sourced ingredients, but we don't actually get to go along with him on those travels doing that detective work. We only rejoin them when the dish has been recreated, and so there's a lot of telling, not showing. The way the food is described is very tantalizing, and it made me want to try a few more dishes than I normally would at my local Japanese restaurant. But I think that the story suffers a little bit with not having that middle detail. This is better than Before the Coffee Gets Cold, but not as good as what you're looking for is in the library. I did a 24-hour reading vlog, and I read 3 books during that time. I read Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, Stardust by Neil Gaiman, and Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. Part of Your World and Yours Truly were just kind of a fun diversion during a rough week. As far as romance books go, I really do like Abby Jimenez's writing. I like her characters kind of have thoughts and conversations that feel a little bit more relatable than some others that I've read. So I did enjoy those. Again, not for everyone because it's romance, but it was fun. So now we're getting to the good stuff. Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. When I started reading it, I was actually in the car at the time. I was a passenger, don't worry. I was just chuckling within the first few pages of the book, and I had to read it out loud to Jeff, who was driving at the time. I just really like the funny narrative voice of this book. It's just such a clever way to tell a mystery story through the lens of a character who has written books for people who want to write mystery stories, but he's never written one himself. In this book, we're following Ernest, and Ernest is telling us the story of how everyone in his family has sometime or another, somehow or another, killed someone. He goes on a weekend ski retreat, like a family reunion, and he discovers another body during that weekend, and that is kind of where we are living for like the rest of the book, is at that retreat and trying to figure out exactly what happened. The result is just this really fun mix of different personalities and different motives, and it's great. I am really excited that it's getting adapted. It's going to be an HBO series, so I'm not sure. We'll see. I read it, I think, over 2 or 3 days, and I actually read it while I was getting my hair done. It kept me distracted, and I wasn't keeping track of how long I had to wait in the chair. As far as mystery settings go, I would give this one a 9 out of 10. You have the atmosphere of a snowed-in ski lodge and all these people who don't really get along in kind of like a camp-like setting to be explored. The way that this book was written is what made me give it 5 stars. Because of Ernest's narrative voice and all the winks to the Golden Age mysteries, I think it's definitely a winner. Next, I want to talk about an actual Agatha Christie mystery, and that is Appointment with Death by Agatha Christie. This one is set in Petra. It's the same setting as Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, if that helps ring a bell. We have a lot of different suspects. They all feel that the elimination of the character who is murdered will be a good thing for everyone involved. So there's a lot of shared motive that kind of keeps you guessing throughout it. Felt like it took a while to get going at the beginning because we're just finding out how manipulative and hated this main character is, and it really makes the case. We also don't get a whole lot of time with our favorite Belgian detective. Poirot doesn't really enter the story until maybe the 2/3 mark or the 3/4 mark even. The ability of Agatha Christie to allow us to memorize such a big cast list because she personalizes the characters so well is so impressive. And the person who is the culprit, honestly, like, I had no idea. The ending definitely took me by surprise. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This book was just what I needed. It is book 2 in the series. We're following Emily and Bamblebee on a journey to find the site where an academic went missing years ago, and they suspect that the location will also be the site of a door or a nexus to the kingdom where Bamblebee comes from, where a threat has been sent after him recently. So he needs to go through that door and resolve some things. I enjoyed this one almost as much as book 1. I think getting to know the 2 characters and things that were happening in book 1 were a little bit more suspenseful, but at the same time, I feel like the stakes kind of get flipped in this one, and Emily has to kind of stand in the gap more for Bamblebee than he did in book 1, and that was kind of a fun element. There are also some new characters that were introduced in this book that provide another fun catalyst, and some older characters that we get to interact with once again. I know that romantasy duologies are really popular lately, but I'm so thankful that this one is a 3-book series, and I can't wait for the next one. The next book I did not rate because it is a memoir, and that is Hereafter by Amy Lynn. Amy tells a story of how her young husband died unexpectedly and her kind of wrestling to cope with that mentally. A lot of her friends who initially supported her in her loss kind of fell away because the length of her grieving process was much longer than they felt that they could cope with. So she often felt abandoned. She went through some health crises of her own during the time that she was still dealing with that loss. Most of the chapters, if you will, are just 1 page or maybe 2 pages long. It goes very quickly. I read it in 1 sitting, and I think that reading it that way kind of allows all of those emotions that she experienced to wash over you, and it just feels very heavy. At the same time, I think the joy in that is getting to experience her growing as a writer throughout this time. Her late husband had told her that she is a writer, and she was struggling to believe that for herself. She had some esteem issues regarding that, and just seeing that come to fruition in this book was really cool. This was devastating, but I'm still very glad I read it. Definitely read the trigger warnings for this one before you give it a try. I'm glad that I did read it. It's one of those books that makes you thankful for life and makes you appreciate and also know how to be a better friend to someone who has suffered a great loss. On a much more cozy perspective, I read Snow and Rose by Emily Winfield Martin. If I had read this one in the winter, this probably would have been 5 stars. It's very cozy. This book is a middle grade fairy tale retelling of Snow White and Rose Red. This one, you don't have the 7 dwarves component. It is just the original fairy tale, but it's kind of told through the lens of a child, and so the ending is not, and they married and lived happily ever after. It's more of a childlike resolution. I think what I like the most about this is that the author also did her illustrations. The style is very soft. The colors are very pleasing. They're wintry, but they're also cozy. Feels kind of like a soft folk art, like watercolor illustrations, I believe, or maybe gouache. This is a good one to read if you're an adult and you like fairy tale retellings, but it also could be a fun one to read to middle grade age kids. I think it could spark some good conversations about how to make friends, how to process emotions in a healthy way, and how to have a good sibling relationship. There were a lot of neat little things that were touched on in this story, and it was sweet. I also read Twilight Falls by Juno Black. This is book 4 in the Shady Hollow mystery series, where we are following animals who live in the same town and often encounter crime. This one is set in springtime, so I thought it was a great time to pick this one up. The snow is melting, the flowers are coming out, and there's descriptions of apple blossoms and cherry trees, and the whole town is preparing for an apple blossom festival, and they are starting to make trips to Twilight Falls, one of the most famous local landmarks. So everyone piles into a ferry and they go down the river to Twilight Falls, where they have a picnic on its banks, and they hike up and see the view from at the top of the falls. And when everyone is there, they witness a murder take place at the top of the falls, and because it's so far away and the mist of the falls is kind of obscuring their view, they don't know exactly what happened or who the killer was. They just know who had been thrown over the falls. The mystery at the center of this one was definitely a quick solve, but it was just fun to be back in Shady Hollow, just strolling down the street, munching on some popcorn and smelling the spring flowers. What more could you ask for? My favorite book that I read recently was The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery. Ellen Montgomery is kind of all seasons because she always finds a way to describe the beauty of nature no matter what time of year it is. And this book is no exception. I've had this book on my radar for a while, but when I saw it in Jen from Reader and Reverie's video of books to read in springtime, Jen shared that she was going to be reading this for spring. I thought it was a great time to pick up, and it's kind of fun that we both loved it. The beginning of this story feels a little bit claustrophobic, and that is because we are following main character Valency, who is 29 years old. She is on the verge of being considered a spinster in her community. She's still living at home with her aging aunts and uncles and her mother. She's very caught in her routines, and her relatives kind of say the same things for her over and over again, and she feels stuck. She feels trapped. Barring her getting married, they don't really have any expectations for her for the future. They just expect that she's going to be living at home with them forever and looking after them and kind of just following that routine endlessly. But when Valency receives an unexpected medical diagnosis, she decides that she's done letting other people dictate how she lives out her days, and she starts to live a little bit recklessly. What's funny to me is that she doesn't act out in a selfish way. She's actually very sacrificial in her newfound independence. She gives others who have been overlooked or misjudged a second look, and because she does that, she discovers new friendship, new happiness, and new love. I love that we have an older main character who is just kind of owning her life, and as I mentioned before, the beautiful descriptions of nature and the coziness of her blue castle come to life were what really took it to 5 stars for me, and this is a new favorite. So those are all the books that I've been reading lately. I'd love to know if you found a book that you would consider a new favorite in the comments below. It doesn't have to be your top favorite, just something that you would add to your favorites shelf. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. I hope you're having a great reading month. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit that like button. If you'd like to stick around, subscribe, and I will see you in another video soon.